Hey there, hi there, and ho there. It's me, GamesR. Today, we're going to talk about the Franklin expedition. Yep, this is stoned history, and I hope you enjoy it. But as always, let's smoke. We got some THCA. We're going to smoke. And if you want to smoke along, you can do that. We don't condone or endorse any illegal activities. And as always, thank you for watching. The Franklin expedition, for those who don't know, I actually know a little bit about this before we get into Wikipedia, was a ship that was trying to discover the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage being a passage in the Arctic that would take you to Japan and China. It was considered a lost expedition, as nobody knows what happened to them. But as always, let's see what the Wikipedia article says. Franklin's Lost Expedition was a failed British voyage of Arctic expeditions led by Captain Sir John Franklin that departed England in 1845 aboard two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, and was assigned to traverse the last unnavigated sections of the Northwest Passage in the Canadian Arctic and to record magnetic data to help determine whether a better understanding could aid navigation. The expedition met with disaster after both ships and their crew, a total of 129 officers and men, became icebound in the Victoria Strait near King William Island in what is today the Canadian territory of Nunavut. After being icebound for more than a year, Erebus and Terror were abandoned in April 1848, by which point 24 men, including Franklin, had died. The survivors, now led by Franklin's second-in-command, Francis Crozier, and Erebus's captain, James Fitzjames, set out for the Canadian mainland and disappeared, presumably having perished, although nobody knows what happened to them. Pressed by Franklin's wife, Jane, and the others, the Admiralty launched a search for the missing expedition in 1848. In the many subsequent searches in the decades afterwards, subsequent artifacts, they spelled that wrong, from the expedition were discovered, including the remains of the two men which were returned to England, a series of two men which were returned to Britain. A series of scientific studies in modern times suggested that the men of the expedition did not all die quickly. Hypothermia, starvation, lead poisoning, or zinc deficiency, and diseases including scurvy, alongside with general exposure to a hostile environment while lacking adequate clothing and nutrition, killed everyone on the expedition in the years after it was last sighted by a whaling ship in July 1845. Cut marks on some of the bones recovered during these studies also supported alleged allegations of cannibalism reported by Franklin's searcher John Ray in 1854. Despite the expedition's notorious failure, it did succeed in exploring the vicinity of one of the many Northwest Passages that would eventually be discovered. Robert McClure led one of the expeditions that investigated the fate of the Franklin expedition, a voyage which would be beset by great challenges and later controversies. McClure's expedition returned after finding an ice-bound route that connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The Northwest Passage was not navigated by boat until 1906 when Roald Amundsen traversed the passage on the Gjoa. In 2014, a search led by Parks Canada located the wreck of the Erebus on the eastern portion of the Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, the Arctic Research Foundation found the wreck of the Terror south of King William Island in a body of water named Terror Bay, which is a cosmic coincidence if I've ever heard it. Research and dive expeditions are an annual occurrence at the wreck sites, now protected as a combined historic site called the Wrecks of the Erebus and Terror National Historic Site. So now you know the basis. But let's get into the background. The search by Europeans for a western shortcut by sea from Europe to Asia began with the voyages of Portuguese and Spanish explorers such as Bartolomé Diaz, Vasco da Gama, and Christopher Columbus in the 15th century. By the mid-19th century, numerous exploratory expeditions had been mounted. These voyages, when successful, added to the sum of European geographic knowledge about the Western Hemisphere, particularly North America. As that knowledge grew, exploration gradually shifted towards the Arctic. They wanted to find a way to get to the east by cutting through the Arctic. By 1804, John Barrow became the second Secretary of the Admiralty, a post he held until 1845. Barrow began pushing the Royal Navy to find a Northwest Passage over the top of Canada to navigate toward the North Pole, organizing a major series of expeditions. Over these 4 decades, explorers include John Ross, David Buchanan, William Edward Parry, Frederick William Beechey, James Clark Ross, nephew of John Ross, George Back, Peter Warren Dease, and Thomas Simpson led productive expeditions to the Canadian Arctic. Among those explorers were John Franklin, who first traveled to the region in 1814 as second in command of an expedition towards the North Pole on the ships Dorothea and Trent. Franklin was subsequently leader of 2 overland expeditions to and along the Canadian Arctic coast in 1819, 1822, and 1825 to 1827. The preparations. These guys basically had all the top-of-the-line stuff. Their provisions included steam heating systems, iron plates, salt-cured meat, tin soup, pemmican, live cattle, lead soldering, which gave them lead poisoning. The expedition set from Greenhithe, Kent, on the morning of 19th May, 1845. The ship stopped briefly. Come on. No! The ship stopped briefly to take aboard fresh water in Stromness, Orkney Island in northern Scotland. From there, they settled to Greenland with the HMS Rattler and a transport ship, Barretto Jr. The passage to Greenland took 30 days. Other limited information is available for subsequent events, pieced together over the next 150 years by other expeditions, explorers, scientists, interviews, and Inuit. The other first-hand information on the expedition's progress is a 2-part victory point note found in the aftermath on King William Island. Franklin's men spent the winter of 45 to 46 on Beechey Island, where 3 crew members died and were buried. After traveling down Peel Sound through the summer of 46, Terror and Air Base became trapped off in ice in King William Island in 1846 and were thought to have never sailed again. According to the second part of the victory point note dated 25 April 1848 and signed by Fitzjames and Crozier, the crew had wintered off King William Island and Franklin had died on 11 June 1847. The remaining crew had abandoned the ships and planned to walk over the island and across the sea towards the Black River on the Canadian mainland. In addition to Franklin, 8 further officers and 15 men had also died by this point. The Victory Point Note is the last known communication of the expedition. What is the Victory Point Note? The Victory Point Note was found 11 years later in May 1859 by William Hobson, lieutenant on the McClintock Arctic expedition, placed in a cairn on northwestern coast of King William Island. It consists of 2 parts written in a pre-printed Admiralty form. The first part was written after the first overwintering in 1847, and the second part was added 1 year later. From the second part, it can be inferred that the document was deposited in a different cairn erected by James Clark Ross in 1830 during James Ross's second Arctic expedition. The first message is written in the body form and dates 28 May 1847. HMS ships Erebus and Terror wintered in the ice in latitude 7005 north, long 98.323 west, having wintered in 1846-7 at Beechey Island. After having ascended Wellington Channel to latitude 70 degrees and returned by the west side of Cornwallis Island, Sir John Franklin commanded the expedition. All well. Party consisting of 2 officers and 6 men left the ships on Monday, 24 May 1847. The second and final part of the written is written largely in the margins. Ship Terror and Erebus were deserted, having been beset since 12. The officers and crews consisted of 105 souls under the command of F.R.M. Crozier, landed here at... there's the coordinates. This paper was found by Lieutenant Irvin under the cairn, supposing to have been built by Sir James Ross in 1831, where it had been deposited by the late Commander Gore. Sir James Ross's pillar has not been found, and the paper has been transferred to this position, which it has been Sir James Ross's pillar has been erected. Sir John Franklin died on the 11th June 1847, and a total loss by deaths in this expedition has been, to this date, 9 officers and 15 men. Signed, James Fitzjames, Captain, HMS Erebus. Signed, F.R.M. Crozier. There's a picture of Gore, Graham Gore. So they found the messages. In 1859, Hobson found a second document. That's the second document that we're talking of. So here's the total timeline. 12, the expedition leaves the 12th of May. 19 of May, the expedition leaves Greenhithe. The 26th of May, the expedition passes Sheerness. The 31st of May, they dock in Scotland. 3rd of June, they leave Scotland. The 4th of July, they anchor in Greenland. They leave Greenland the 12th of July. The 26th of July, they're in Lancaster Sound. 1845 to 1846, they return by west side of Cornwallis Island. The expedition winters at Beechey Island. The 1st of January, John Torrington dies and is buried at Beechey Island. The 4th of January, John Hartnell dies in his autopsy before being buried at Beechey Island. April 3rd, William Braine dies but is stored in the ship instead of buried immediately. Around April 8th, Braine is buried at Beechey Island after his body is gnawed on by ship rats. HMS Erebus and Terror leave Beechey Island and sail down Peel Sound towards King William Island. The 12th of September, ships trapped in the ice off King William Island, 1846 to 1847. The expedition winters on King William Island. The 28th of May, 1847, a 6-man party leave identical notes at Victory Point. These are the Victory Point notes. They return without finding a message in 1831. That's the cairn. June 11th, Franklin dies. Fitzjames becomes captain. 1847, preparations begin for an overland search for Franklin's expedition, led by John Ray and Sir John Richardson, while Thomas Edward Laws More performs a maritime search. The 22nd, Erebus and Terror are abandoned after 1 year. Men camp at Victory Point. Later, Crozier's Landing. 25th of May, 1848, a second note left by Fitzjames on the 1847 one. 24 men are dead. July, scheduled end of provisions. Many cans found unopened in the ships and outside. 1849, Richardson returns with no news of Franklin expedition. 1850, John Forsyth leads a brief search aboard the Prince Albert, returns with Sir John's winter quarters. Returning with reports to Sir John's winter quarters. So we go a few years. All the way to 2024, bones discovered as James Fitzjames. They finally find his bones. The legacy. Because we always want to talk about the legacy here. That's all we care about. The most meaningful outcome of the Franklin expedition was the mapping of several thousand miles of hitherto unsurveyed coastland by expeditions searching for Franklin's lost ship and crew. As Richard Syriax noted, the loss of the expedition probably added much more geographical knowledge than its successful return would have done. At the same time, it largely quelled the Admiralty's appetite for the Arctic exploration. There was a gap of many years before the Nares expedition and George Nares' declaration that there was no thoroughfare to the North Pole. His words marked the end of the Royal Navy's involvement in Arctic exploration. The end of an era in which such exploits were widely seen by the British public of worldly expenditures of human effort and monetary resources, given how difficult and risky it was for professional explorers to cross the Northwest Passage. It would be impossible for the average merchant ships of today to use this route for trade. Citation needed. An unnamed commentator and a critic wrote in 1859, quote, "We think that we can fairly make out the account between the costs and results of these Arctic expeditions, and ask whether it is worth while to risk so much for that which is so difficult of attainment, and when attained it is so worthless." The navigation of the Northwest Passage in 1903-1905 by Roald Amundsen with the Giowa expedition ended the centuries-long quest for the route. And that's where our story ends. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye!